Seniors at Wyoming Catholic College in their fall semester always read Herman Melville's Moby Dick, one of the great novels of the English language tradition, and one that gets better, in my experience, every time one reads it. Melville was obviously a man of his time, and one of the major concerns that 19th century writers had to engage was the rise of a kind of thinking that was known as utilitarianism, probably familiar to many, but it was the idea that you looked at things in terms of their usefulness. And according to John Stuart Mill and others, the principle of utilitarianism was a kind of rationalizing of human action with an eye toward the greatest good for the greatest number. There was a certain inhumanity to the calculations because the attempt really was to make human ethics a matter of mathematics as much as possible. A certain kind of selfishness was justified by these means, and you see it showing up all over the place in the 19th century novel, such as Dickens' Hard Times, and a novel that it influenced, Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, where the protagonist, Raskolnikov, has a kind of utilitarian view of human things that justifies killing an old pawnbroker if he can bring greater good out of the money that he takes from her after her death. But that's sort of an aside. My point today, and the poem I want to look at, has to do with Melville's turn to verse after the failure of his novelistic career, a pretty tragic failure in the view of most literary critics, given his superb talents. But in any case, he was also quite an accomplished poet. And he had a volume that came out right after the Civil War of poems that were about various battles in the Civil War and various aspects, such as the New York draft riots in July of 1863, which had to do with Irishmen in particular being drafted into the United States Army against their will, and there were great riots in the city about that. This poem is delightful to me, and its texture is such that I think you get the irony of it pretty quickly. It's called A Utilitarian View of the Monitor's Fight. Just a quick note, this was a battle, it's also called the Battle of Hampton Roads. It was fought in March of 1862 between the first two ironclads, one on the Confederate side and one on the Union side. And Melville makes his poem out of this clash. Okay, here's the poem. Plain be the phrase, yet apt the verse, more ponderous than nimble. For since grimed war here laid aside his painted pomp, 'twould ill befit overmuch to ply the rhyme's barbaric symbol. Hail to victory without the God of glory, zeal that needs no fans or banners, plain mechanic power, plied cogently in war, now placed where war belongs, among the trades and artisans. Yet this was battle and intense, beyond the strife of fleets heroic, deadlier, closer, calm mid-storm, no passion, all went on by crank, pivot and screw, and calculations of caloric. Needless to dwell, the story's known, the ringing of those plates on plates still ringeth round the world, the clangor of the blacksmith's fray, the anvil din, resounds this message from the fates. War shall yet be, and to the end, but war paint shows the streaks of weather. War yet shall be, but the warriors are now but operatives. War is made less grand than peace, and a singe runs through lace and feather. I think you see very clearly Melville's perspective here. War has become a matter of utility, individual courage, the glamour of war has gone away. It was still evident, of course, in some figures in the Civil War, particularly Jeb Stuart, for example, the cavalryman on the Confederate side, so important to General Lee. But notice that everything here is about machines. War has been made a matter of mechanisms, and the warrior has been reduced from the great figure like Lord Nelson earlier in the 19th century in the Battle of Trafalgar. The valor of ships that have to work with ropes and winds and sails, and this new shift toward mere machinery. The anvil den. There's an evocation here of the kind of Hephaestus or Vulcan sense of the blacksmith as having taken over war. We've moved far from the knights and ladies of romance, from the great heroic valor of the figures of epic, and even from the war that Melville seems to invoke here from the American West. War paint shows the streaks of weather. And then the last few lines, I think, making the point very vividly, and I think also hinting at why Tolkien and other writers, C.S. Lewis, who can revive the sense of personal valor and the beauty of courage, are so popular now. Here in Melville, the warriors are now but operatives. War is made less grand than peace, and a singe runs through lace and feather.